Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Nigeria's president announced that he'll be working from home for the next few months because rats have invaded his office. Having just returned from a 100-day absence, that's raised questions about whether Muhammadu Buhari's health is up to the job, even though he's back in the country. Also, there have long been calls for Africa to reshape its economic models by reducing reliance on natural resources. We hear from author N.J Ayuk, who believes that much of the criticism of the managing of the continent's oil wealth is overly negative. And demand for organic produce in Nigeria is rocketing year on year. Many of those paying closer attention to the way their food's are grown have become accustomed to the choice abroad and have now headed back home to start their own businesses. We take a closer look. But first, finally back at home after a 3-month absence, Nigeria's president announced that he'll be working from home from now on for the next 3 months as rats have damaged his office. Muhammadu Buhari's office has said that the 74-year-old's productivity will not be affected. He returned to Nigeria on Saturday, having spent 100 days in London for medical treatment. His time away raised concerns about his fitness to lead, and despite making a public address on Monday, some critics have remarked on Buhari's failure to tackle worries about his health head-on. Japheth Omujua tells us more.
President for the better part of a quarter of a year. So it's better than his absence, even though he gets to work away from his office in his house. I also think that the excuse about rats is quite embarrassing. It is obvious he's recuperating. They prefer he works from home rather than from the office. That's a good enough excuse than to say something about rats, which is pretty embarrassing.
So if the excuse, as you say, put it, about rats is pretty transparent, is the statement about Buhari's plans to work from home likely to be seen as a sign of weakness by his critics?
I mean, it's not likely to be seen as a sign of weakness. I think everybody will get to see that this guy is recuperating. He's an old man. He's been ill for over 103 days. He's been out of the country. So it's not going to be seen as a sign of weakness. I think what's a sign of weakness is that they have to come up with such a very, very poor, silly, untenable excuse. Now he's back in the country. Everybody expects him to perform, whether he works from his bedroom or he works from an office. The most important thing is that he puts the country back on track. And the economy, to complete the recovery, the war on terror, to make sure that Boko Haram's new advances do not go beyond where they are now so that they can get back on the retreat, and to make sure that everything is in order, basically.
Japheth Omujua there for us. Now, white Zimbabweans who lost farms under President Robert Mugabe's controversial land seizure program in the year 2000 have launched a new legal bid to be compensated. Only a few hundred farmers still operate in the country after around 4,500 of them were forced off their land. The evictions sparked violence and some farmers who resisted were killed. The dispossessed farmers seeking compensation have headed to court under a protocol of the Southern African Regional Bloc, or SADC. And on the eve of the general election that will decide Angola's first new president in almost 4 decades, the candidate for the ruling party, Defense Minister João Lourenço, has insisted that he would be his own man if he won. Now, he's stepping up for the MPLA after veteran leader José Eduardo dos Santos announced that he would not be running again after 38 years in the job. Our correspondent reports from Luanda.
It's a calm pre-election evening in Luanda. Around 9 million Angolans who registered to vote will head to the polls when they open at 8 tomorrow morning. The MPLA's candidate's Defense Minister, João Lourenço's campaign has centered around fighting rampant corruption, cronyism, and diversifying the economy in Africa's second-largest oil-producing nation. These are common campaign promises, and should he win tomorrow's election, he may have to take on the gargantuan wealth of the Dos Santos family, with tentacles in almost every aspect of the country's economy. The main opposition UNITA party has already indicated its willingness to form a coalition should the MPLA lose power.
Now, there have long been calls for Africa to reduce reliance on natural resources and diversify economies to include more manufacturing. Scaling back dependence on export commodities and key sectors like oil and gas touches on key aspects of life on the continent, from good governance to more inclusive wealth management. One example of the risk is Nigeria. It's Africa's top oil producer, but imports most of its petrol and struggles when the price of crude drops. Now, earlier I spoke to N.J Ayuk, who's just written a book about the role crude plays in African economic development. He believes much of the criticism of the management of the continent's oil wealth is overly negative.
If we don't tell Africa's story, somebody else is going to tell Africa's story, and they're not going to tell it well. I draw inspiration from walking in the continent day in, day out, participating in a lot of oil and gas transactions, and seeing the power of what oil and gas can do, and also seeing some of the problems that have been created by poor management and poor governance of the sector.
Now, the problems of the sector have long been documented. You've characterised them, and as many have, as the resource curse. Why do you think calling it the resource curse is no longer accurate or relevant?
It's no longer accurate or relevant is because there are a lot of things that are being done right now to change that. For example, you mentioned Nigeria. Nigeria moved where you had an issue like local content. You had less than 5% of Nigerians participating in the entire supply chain. Now you have more. Let's not forget, you have a lot of Nigerian companies today actually acquiring assets from oil companies. You turn around on the other side, you look at Equatorial Guinea. They have done an amazing job with using gas to power the country, gas monetization, and developing a brand new project today, which you have with Fortuna LNG. There are some really great things that is coming out of the oil and gas industry. A lot needs to be done. We need to move more on diversification, but to basically shut Africa down and say, forget it, they can't do it, they would never get it right, I think it's wrong. I think we need to embrace Africa. We need to provide solutions, not just criticisms of the continent.
So what are these solutions that you think they should be focused on?
Big solutions. Use your gas to diversify your economy. Focus on industrialization. Take, like what I mentioned in the book, take Gabon's environmental stewardship and replicate it around the continent. Take Equatorial Guinea's gas monetization, replicate it around the continent. Take Ghana's really great regulatory framework and replicate it around the continent. Take Nigeria's local content policies and really push this. Today, the African woman or the African male is the last hired and the first fired in the oil and gas sector. You cannot have true equality in that sector when Africans don't have a chance there. Recreate that and redraw that. But also use something that is working when you look at how, for example, Uganda is really striving to get it right, but we have to continue engaging civil society to really push and drive leadership to ensure that all voices are on the table so that these resources can actually help those who are trying to meet ends and those who want burdens and barriers lifted in the continent, those who have been left on the roadside. Those are key solutions that we mentioned in the book. We think if we follow them, if we address them, and these are tried, true, and tested solutions that have happened. So we took African case studies that have worked really well, and we say, why don't we put these case studies, and we say, if we're talking to a new country like Tanzania today coming into the industry, if you put these African success stories, you can have an industry that you can be proud of.
N.J Ayuk there speaking to me a little earlier on. Well, finally, organic farms have increased tenfold over the past decade in Nigeria. Demand comes mainly from people who've returned from countries where organic produce is more commonplace. Well, our correspondents have met some of the entrepreneurs who've converted to organic production and say that they are already struggling to meet local demand.
Tony, I need more eggs.
Olushola is one of very few organic farmers in Nigeria. Her chickens are reared on purely natural feeds. They can't lay enough eggs to satisfy growing demand for organic produce. Consumers are becoming increasingly health conscious.
We've had serious cases of cancer. I think that is one of the key things that now drive people, especially women who are responsible for their families. And worse still is the fact that we now even have children developing cancer. So many are now thinking twice. They're now wondering, could it have something to do with the food we're eating?
Olushola has regular visits from farmers who want to switch to organic. Kingsley has travelled several hundred kilometres to seek advice on how to convert his farm. He had a bad experience raising chickens the conventional way.
With the feeding and all the antibiotics and all the treatments and stuff, and it was not very good. And I decided that I wasn't going to do any of that anymore, but I would rather go for these organic things. And from what I've seen, everything looks quite humane in there. I mean, you could see even the chicks look happy, right? And I'm really looking forward to being able to replicate some of what I've seen here back at my farm.
The demand for organic produce is being driven by Lagosians. Juice bars like this are springing up across the city. The founder of So Fresh tries to source organic produce where possible.
We have a 4-month window season in the Jos area of Nigeria that we can source for organic strawberries. But outside that 4-month window, the rest will rely on what comes in from Europe or from America.
Healthy eating is gaining ground in Nigeria, but demand is far greater than supply for now.
And that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.